Zwiextera had seen many species in her 3 centuries as a galactic diplomatic observer, but nothing had prepared her for the humans. She floated in her containment suit aboard the observation vessel Contemplation, watching through the transparent aluminum viewport as the human fleet assembled in the Sol system's outer reaches. The sight defied everything she thought she knew about warfare. The Veltari had been monitoring human activities for the past 50 standard cycles, ever since the bipedal mammals had achieved faster-than-light travel. Most species took millennia to progress from primitive chemical rockets to crude warp drives. Humans had done it in less than 200 of their years. That alone should have been a warning. Observer Zwiextera chirped her assistant, Kreval, his crystalline form catching the light from Sol's distant star. The human delegation has agreed to meet with us aboard their command vessel. Zwiextera's tentacles writhed with nervous energy. The Galactic Council had sent her here to assess the human threat level after the incident at Kepler 442b. 3 Vorthan patrol ships had encountered a single human exploration vessel in disputed territory. According to the survivors, the humans had politely asked them to leave. When the Vorthans refused and powered their weapons, the human ship had systematically disabled all 3 vessels without firing a single shot. The humans then provided medical aid and escorted the Vorthans to the nearest station. "This behavior is unusual," she murmured, checking her translation matrix one final time. Most species responded to aggression with either submission or overwhelming force. The humans had chosen a third path that made no sense to galactic military doctrine. The shuttle ride to the human command ship gave Zwiextera her first close look at their fleet. Unlike the elegant curves of Alterian vessels or the crystalline structures of her own people, human ships looked like they had been hammered out of raw metal by craftsmen who cared more about function than beauty. They bristled with sensor arrays, communication dishes, and weapon systems that seemed to grow organically from the hull rather than being integrated into the design. "Ugly things," muttered her security escort, Commander Threshka of the Hegemony Guard. His scaled hide rippled with disdain. "No wonder they fight so strangely. They probably don't understand proper warfare." Zwiextera wasn't so sure. As they approached the human flagship, she noticed something that made her secondary hearts skip a beat. The fleet wasn't just assembled randomly. Every ship was positioned with mathematical precision, creating overlapping fields of fire and mutual support networks. More disturbing still, she could see smaller vessels moving between the larger ones in patterns that suggested constant resupply and crew rotation. This wasn't a fleet preparing for battle. This was a fleet that expected a very long war. The docking bay of the UES Indomitable was a controlled chaos of activity. Human crew members in their distinctive blue and gray uniforms moved with efficient purpose, loading supplies and checking equipment. What struck Zwiextera immediately was how young they looked. Most galactic military forces consisted of seasoned veterans with decades of experience. These humans looked barely out of adolescence by most species standards. "Welcome aboard," said a tall human with graying hair and insignia that marked him as senior command. "I'm Admiral Sarah Chun, commander of the 3rd Fleet. Thank you for coming." Zwiextera activated her translation implant. "I am Observer Zwiextera of the Veltari Collective, here on behalf of the Galactic Council. We appreciate your willingness to meet during what appears to be a mobilization." Admiral Chin's expression didn't change, but Zwiextera's emotional sensors detected a slight spike in stress hormones. "Please, follow me to the briefing room. I think it's important you understand what we're dealing with here." As they walked through the corridors of the ship, Zwiextera observed the human crew with growing unease. They moved with a quiet confidence that reminded her of apex predators. More concerning was their diversity. She counted at least a dozen different ethnic variations among the humans, all working together seamlessly. Most species that achieved interstellar travel had long since homogenized their populations. The humans seemed to celebrate their differences. The briefing room was spartanly furnished, dominated by a holographic display showing the local galactic arm. Admiral Chun gestured for them to sit in specially designed chairs that accommodated different physiologies. 3 days ago, Chun began, we received a message from the Zirian Dominion. I'm sure you're familiar with them. ZYXTRA's tentacles coiled involuntarily. The Zirions were one of the oldest and most militaristic species in the galaxy. They had conquered dozens of star systems and enslaved countless billions. Most civilized species avoided them entirely. They have issued what they call an integration notice for Earth and our outer colonies, Chen continued. According to their message, humanity has been selected for absorption into their empire. We have 30 standard days to surrender unconditionally or face total annihilation. Commander Threshkaw's scales brightened with surprise. But surely you will comply? The Zirian fleet is massive. They have conquered species far more advanced than humans. Admiral Chin smiled, and ZYXTRA felt a chill run through her nervous system. There was something predatory about that expression. Commander, with respect, I don't think you understand humans very well. We received their ultimatum 3 days ago. We sent our response this morning. What did you tell them? ZYXTRA asked, though she suspected she already knew. We told them to go to hell. The silence in the room was deafening. Krival's crystalline form actually cracked slightly from shock. Even Threshkaw, a member of a warrior species, looked stunned. Admiral, ZYXTRA said carefully, perhaps you don't fully comprehend the scope of Zirian military power. They have over 10,000 ships of a line, planet killers that can sterilize worlds from orbit, and genetic weapons that can target specific species. They have never been defeated in open warfare. I understand perfectly, Chen replied. That's why we've spent the last 72 hours mobilizing every available asset. Not just military vessels, but merchant ships, research vessels, even civilian craft that can mount weapons. We're not just preparing to fight the Zirions. We're preparing to destroy them utterly. ZYXTRA's translation matrix struggled with the concept. The mathematical impossibility of the situation was staggering. Even if humans could field their entire space-capable fleet, they would be outnumbered at least 100 to 1. The Zirions had been perfecting warfare for millennia, while humans had barely been in space for decades. Admiral, forgive my directness, but this is suicide. Your species will be extinct within a matter of days. Chun stood and walked to the holographic display. With a gesture, she brought up tactical projections showing human fleet positions throughout their territory. Observer, may I tell you a story about human history? ZYXTRA nodded, fascinated despite herself. About 250 years ago, there was a human nation called Finland. It had a population of about 3.5 million people. In the middle of their winter, they were invaded by the Soviet Union, which had a population of nearly 200 million and one of the most powerful militaries on Earth. The hologram shifted to show historical data from Earth's records. By every logical calculation, Finland should have been conquered in weeks. Instead, they held out for over 3 months and inflicted casualties at a ratio of nearly 5 to 1. They used the terrain, the weather, and their knowledge of their own land to turn every forest into a death trap and every hill into a fortress. Chun turned back to face them. The Soviets eventually won through sheer numbers, but the cost was so high that it influenced their enemies' decisions for years afterward. The lesson isn't that Finland won. The lesson is that some fights are worth having regardless of the odds. But this is different, Threshkaw protested. This is space warfare, not planetary defense. You cannot hide behind terrain that doesn't exist. Admiral Chen's smile widened. Commander, you're thinking like someone who has only fought civilized wars. Let me show you something. She manipulated the display to show the outer reaches of the Sol system. What ZYXTRA saw made her gasp. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was alive with activity. Hundreds of mining platforms and orbital refineries were working at maximum capacity. But they weren't mining precious metals or rare elements. They were hollowing out asteroids and filling them with engines and weapons. We've been preparing for this possibility since we first encountered other spacefaring species, Chen explained. Not because we wanted war, but because we understood something that most galactic civilizations seem to have forgotten. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is what you have when you're too dangerous to attack. The display zoomed in on one of the asteroids. It was enormous, perhaps 50 kilometers in diameter. Sensors showed it was riddled with tunnels and chambers. Docking bays had been carved into its surface, and massive thruster arrays were being attached to its trailing edge. We've weaponized over 300 asteroids in the last 5 years, Chen continued. Each one is essentially a mobile fortress capable of operating independently for months. They're powered by fusion reactors, armed with railguns and particle beam weapons, and equipped with manufacturing facilities that can produce ammunition and spare parts from raw materials. ZYXTRA's mind reeled. The engineering challenges alone should have been impossible for such a young species. Al, how did you manage such a massive undertaking? Observer, you have to understand something about humans. We're not the strongest species, or the fastest, or the smartest, but we're the most persistent. When we decide something needs to be done, we'll throw every resource we have at the problem until it's solved. She brought up manufacturing statistics that defied belief. In the 3 days since receiving the Zirian ultimatum, human industrial output had increased by 400%. Factories that produce consumer goods had been retooled to manufacture weapons and armor. Civilian research facilities had been converted to military development labs. Even schools have been transformed into training centers for technical specialists. This is impossible, Krival whispered. No species can reorganize their entire civilization in 72 hours. Most species can't, Chen agreed. But most species have never faced extinction. When humans are backed into a corner, we become something different, something dangerous. The Admiral called up another display, this one showing human colonies throughout their space. Every settled world was buzzing with activity. Orbital shipyards were working around the clock to produce vessels of every description. Agricultural worlds were stockpiling food and medical supplies. Research stations were frantically working to develop new weapons and defensive technologies. The Zirions think they're facing a young species that will crumble under pressure, Chun said. They've studied our peaceful expansion into space, our diplomatic overtures, our preference for trade over conflict. They've concluded that we're weak. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that made the air itself seem heavier. They've made a fundamental error in judgment. They think our desire for peace makes us pacifists. They don't understand that sometimes the most peaceful people are the most dangerous when threatened, because they understand the true cost of violence. We know what we're choosing when we go to war. Admiral Chun activated another display, this one showing intelligence reports from throughout human space. ZYXTRA read with growing alarm as the data revealed the scope of human preparation. They had been quietly cataloging the strengths and weaknesses of every known species for decades. They had developed contingency plans for conflicts with civilizations they had never even contacted. They had wargamed scenarios that included fighting multiple species simultaneously. Admiral, ZYXTRA said slowly, how long have you been preparing for galactic war? Since the day we achieved FTL travel, Chun replied without hesitation. Our first contact protocols weren't just diplomatic. They were intelligence-gathering operations. Every trade mission, every cultural exchange, every scientific collaboration was also an opportunity to study potential enemies. The revelation hit ZYXTRA like a physical blow. The humans hadn't been naively exploring the galaxy, making friends and trading goods. They had been conducting the most sophisticated intelligence operation in galactic history. Under the guise of peaceful contact, they had been studying every species, learning their technologies, mapping their territories, and identifying their weaknesses. But you've been model galactic citizens, she protested. You've honored every treaty, respected boundaries, contributed to scientific advancement. Of course we have, Chen said. War is expensive and wasteful. It destroys resources and kills productive people. We much prefer peace and cooperation. But that doesn't mean we're unprepared for the alternative. Commander Threshka had been silent during this exchange, his scales cycling through colors that indicated deep thought. Finally, he spoke. Admiral, what you're describing sounds like a species-wide paranoia disorder. No healthy civilization spends this much effort preparing for wars that may never come. Admiral Chen considered this for a moment. Commander, tell me, how many species has the hegemony lost to conquest or extermination in the last millennium? Dozens, Threshka admitted. But that's the natural order. Weak species are absorbed by stronger ones. It's been this way since the beginning of galactic civilization. And humans find that unacceptable, Chen said flatly. We've seen what happens to species that rely on the goodwill of others for their survival. We've studied the histories of civilizations that trusted in peace treaties and mutual defense pacts. Most of them are extinct. She brought up a final display, this one showing the deployment pattern of the human fleet. Zyxthara stared in amazement as she realized the true scope of human strategy. They weren't planning to meet the Xerian fleet in a single decisive battle. Instead, they intended to fight a running campaign across dozens of star systems, using hit-and-run tactics to bleed their enemies while protecting their own assets. The Xerions expect us to defend our worlds, Chen explained. They'll bring their full fleet to Earth and demand surrender when we can't match their firepower. But we're not going to be here. By the time their main force arrives, our mobile assets will be striking targets throughout their territory. Terrorist tactics, Threshka said with disgust. Effective tactics, Chen corrected. The Xerions have built an empire based on intimidation and overwhelming force. Their whole strategy depends on their enemies fighting conventionally and losing quickly. But we're not going to give them a conventional war. She gestured to the holographic display of asteroids. Each of these fortresses can operate independently for months, striking supply lines and communication nodes throughout Xerian space. They can't be easily detected because they look like natural objects until they power up their weapons. They can't be easily destroyed because they're essentially solid rock with military systems built into them. Zyxthara felt sick as the implications became clear. You're going to turn the entire galactic arm into a war zone. If that's what it takes, Chen said without emotion. The Xerions have made this choice, not us. They could have continued to ignore human space as they have for the past 50 years. They could have attempted diplomatic contact. They chose to issue an ultimatum for our extinction. Now, they'll face the consequences. The meeting continued for another hour, but Zyxthara barely heard the details. Her mind was reeling from what she had learned. The humans weren't just preparing to fight the Xerions. They were preparing to fundamentally change the nature of galactic warfare. If their strategy succeeded, it would prove that even the mightiest empire could be brought down by a smaller, but more determined enemy. If it failed, it would likely take half the galaxy down with them. As they prepared to return to their observation vessel, Admiral Chen made one final statement that would haunt Zyxthara's dreams for years to come. Observer, please make sure your report to the Galactic Council includes this message. Humanity has no desire for conquest or domination. We want to live in peace with our neighbors and contribute to galactic civilization. But we will not be enslaved, and we will not be exterminated. Anyone who attempts either will learn why humans became the apex predators on a world full of creatures stronger, faster, and better armed than we are. As their shuttle departed the human flagship, Zyxthara looked back at the assembled fleet. In the distance, she could see the modified asteroids beginning to move, slowly but inexorably taking up positions throughout the system. Soon they would begin their journey to Xerian space, carrying with them the promise of a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. She began composing her report to the Galactic Council, knowing that her words would likely be dismissed as hysteria or human propaganda. The galaxy's leaders had grown comfortable with the established order, where wars were fought between fleets in designated areas, and peace was maintained through careful balance of power. The humans were about to shatter that comfortable illusion forever. 2 weeks after her meeting with Admiral Chun, Zhuangxia found herself aboard the Galactic Council Observation Station Harmony, watching long-range sensors track the movement of human forces throughout local space. The data streams flowing across her workstation painted a picture that defied every military doctrine she had studied in her centuries of diplomatic service. The human fleet had scattered. "This makes no sense," muttered Dr. Vex9, the Council's chief military analyst. His insectoid features clicked together in agitation as he reviewed the tactical displays. They've divided their forces into hundreds of small groups. No coherent battle line. No concentrated firepower, no apparent command structure. It's military suicide. Zhuangxia wasn't so sure. She had spent the past 2 weeks analyzing every piece of human military history she could access, and a disturbing pattern was emerging. Humans have been fighting wars for their entire recorded history, but their approach to conflict was unlike anything in the galactic databases. "Perhaps we should examine their historical precedents," she suggested, calling up data on human military campaigns. "Look at this engagement from their Second World War. The humans call it D-Day." The holographic display shifted to show Earth's European continent, circa 1944 CE. The image depicted the largest amphibious assault in human history, with thousands of landing craft converging on a heavily fortified coastline. The defenders had months to prepare, Zhuangxia explained. They built massive fortifications, established overlapping fields of fire, and concentrated their best troops in the area. By every logical calculation, the assault should have failed with catastrophic casualties. Vex9's mandibles twitched. What happened? The humans succeeded through deception and overwhelming coordination. They convinced the defenders that the real attack would come at a different location while simultaneously launching diversionary assaults across hundreds of kilometers of coastline. The defenders couldn't concentrate their forces because they couldn't determine where the main thrust would come from. She overlaid the D-Day assault plan with the current deployment of human forces. The parallels were unmistakable. Small groups of ships were moving toward dozens of different Xerian outposts and supply stations, while larger formations maintained seemingly random patrol patterns that could quickly converge on multiple targets. They're not dividing their forces randomly, she realized. They're creating multiple, simultaneous threats that will force the Xerions to spread their defenses thin. Commander Threshka emerged from the sensor alcove, his scales displaying the deep purple of concern. The Xerian response fleet has been detected entering human space. Over 8,000 ships moving in standard formation toward Earth. They should arrive in 6 days. Zhuangxia studied the tactical projection of the approaching Xerian fleet. It was an impressive sight. Massive dreadnoughts surrounded by escort carriers, supported by clouds of smaller vessels. The formation was a textbook example of overwhelming force projection, designed to intimidate enemies into surrender before battle was even joined. "Have humans responded to this development?" she asked. "That's the strange part," Threshka replied. "Earth's orbital defenses are powering up, but the planet isn't being evacuated. Long-range communications suggest they're conducting business as usual. Either they're incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." Dr. Vex9 brought up a communication intercept from human military channels. "We've decoded fragments of their operational orders. The humans are calling their strategy Operation Hornet's Nest. The reference is unclear." Zhuangxia accessed the human cultural database and felt her secondary heart skip again. A hornet's nest was a colonial insect structure that, when disturbed, released swarms of aggressive defenders capable of inflicting painful wounds on much larger creatures. The metaphor was disturbingly appropriate. "They're not planning to defend Earth," she whispered. "They're using it as bait." Before anyone could respond, proximity alarms began sounding throughout the observation station. The tactical display erupted with new contacts as sensors detected massive energy discharges throughout Xerian space. The first phase of humanity's counterattack had begun. What unfolded over the next few hours challenged every assumption about civilized warfare. Rather than engaging the Xerian fleet directly, The scattered human forces had simultaneously struck dozens of targets deep in enemy territory. Supply depots exploded in silent flashes of light. Communication relays went dark one by one. Fuel refineries became expanding clouds of superheated gas. Impossible, breathed Vex-9. How did they coordinate simultaneous attacks across such distances? The communication lag alone should make this level of synchronization impossible. Vaexthara was studying the attack patterns with growing admiration and horror. They're not using real-time coordination. This was all pre-planned. Every human unit was given specific targets and timetables weeks in advance. They're operating as independent cells while maintaining overall strategic coherence. The genius of the strategy was becoming apparent. The Zerions had based their military doctrine on the assumption that their enemies would fight conventionally, meeting force with force in decisive battles. Instead, the humans had turned the entire galactic region into a chessboard where every move served multiple purposes. A priority transmission arrived from the Zerion command ship, directed at the Galactic Council Observer Station. Admiral Kethvar, the Zerion fleet commander, appeared on the holographic communicator. His reptilian features were mottled with rage. "Council observers," he hissed, "these humans are conducting themselves as pirates and terrorists, not as a legitimate military force. They attack civilian targets and flee before we can respond. This is not honorable warfare." Commander Threshka activated the reply channel. "Admiral, you are the one who issued an ultimatum for human extinction. By what standard do you claim the protection of civilized military protocols?" "We offered them the opportunity to submit to integration," Kethvar replied. "That is a traditional right of superior civilizations. These attacks on our infrastructure are violations of accepted combat doctrine." Zwaixthara couldn't help but interrupt. "Admiral, perhaps you should reconsider your definition of accepted. I've been studying human military history, and this is exactly how they've always fought when facing superior numbers. They make the cost of victory unacceptable to their enemies." The Zerion commander's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, another wave of human attacks erupted across the tactical display. This time, the targets were more ambitious. 3 Zerion patrol fleets found themselves under assault by human forces that appeared from multiple directions simultaneously, struck hard at the command vessels, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. "They're studying your response patterns," Zwaixthara explained. "Every engagement teaches them more about your capabilities and tactics. They're treating this entire war as a learning exercise." She brought up analysis of the human attack patterns. "Look at the progression. The first strikes were against static targets with minimal defenses. Now they're engaging your mobile forces, but only under circumstances where they have overwhelming local superiority. They're systematically testing your reactions and adapting their strategies accordingly." Admiral Kethvar studied the data with growing unease. This level of tactical flexibility requires sophisticated command and control systems. How are they coordinating these attacks without centralized command? Because they don't have centralized command, Zwaixthara realized. They've created a distributed intelligence network where every unit can make independent decisions while working toward common objectives. It's like fighting a swarm organism rather than a conventional military force. The implications were staggering. Traditional military forces could be defeated by destroying their command structure or key assets. But the humans had created a system that became stronger as it was dispersed. Every attack that scattered their forces made them harder to target while maintaining their combat effectiveness. Dr. Vex-9 was analyzing the human communications intercepts with increasing agitation. "They're not even using traditional military hierarchy," he reported. "Orders are passed through a consensus system where individual commanders vote on objectives and tactics. But somehow they maintain perfect operational security and coordination." Zwaixthara accessed the human historical records again, searching for precedents. What she found made her want to retreat to her home world and never venture into space again. Human military development had been driven by constant warfare against their own species. They had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing creatures exactly like themselves, developing tactics specifically designed to overcome human psychology and technology. "We've made a critical error in our assessment," she announced to her colleagues. "We've been thinking of humans as a young species with primitive military capabilities. But they've been fighting wars for thousands of years. They've had time to develop tactical doctrines that we can't even comprehend because our species never fought each other with this level of intensity." She displayed a comparison chart showing military conflict frequency across different species. The pattern was clear and horrifying. Most galactic civilizations had achieved space flight only after reaching internal peace and stability. Humans had somehow managed to develop interstellar travel while simultaneously perfecting the most sophisticated warfare techniques in recorded history. "They're not learning how to fight the Zirions," she continued. "They already know how to fight the Zirions. They've been fighting creatures like them for their entire evolutionary history." Commander Threshkaw's scales had shifted to a deep amber color, indicating fear. "Are you suggesting that humans are naturally predisposed toward warfare?" "I'm suggesting that humans have turned warfare into a science," ZYXTRA replied. "Every conflict in their history has been a laboratory for developing more effective ways to defeat enemies. They've been preparing for galactic war since before they achieved spaceflight." The observation station's sensors detected another development that confirmed her worst fears. Human forces were beginning to converge on several Zirian worlds, but not in the direct assault pattern that conventional doctrine would suggest. Instead, they were taking positions that would allow them to interdict supply lines and communication networks while avoiding direct confrontation with defensive installations. "They're going to starve them out," she whispered. "They're not going to conquer Zirian worlds. They're going to make them uninhabitable by cutting off all external support." The strategy was breathtaking in its ruthlessness. Rather than suffering massive casualties in direct assaults, the humans were planning to make Zirian space economically unviable. No trade ships would risk running human blockades. No supply convoys would attempt to traverse star systems where human forces could strike without warning. Admiral Kethvar was receiving reports from throughout his territory, and his confidence was visibly shaking. 15 supply convoys destroyed, 8 communication relays offline, 3 refinery complexes evacuated due to human raids. "They're disrupting our entire logistics network," Admiral Threshkaw said carefully. "Perhaps it's time to reconsider this conflict. The humans have demonstrated capabilities that were not anticipated. A negotiated settlement might be preferable to continued escalation." Impossible, Kithvar snarled. "The Dominion does not negotiate with inferior species. We will crush these mammals and absorb their worlds as planned." But even as he spoke, new reports were arriving that painted an increasingly grim picture. Human forces were proving remarkably difficult to locate and engage. Their ships seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with devastating effectiveness, and vanish before countermeasures could be deployed. More troubling still, they were demonstrating an intimate knowledge of Zirian military procedures and capabilities. "How are they predicting our responses so accurately?" the Admiral demanded. ZYXTRA brought up intelligence reports from human space. "They've been studying you for decades, Admiral. Every Zirian vessel that entered neutral space was shadowed by human observation ships. Every communication was intercepted and analyzed. Every tactical manual was acquired through espionage or trade connections with species you've conquered." She paused to let this sink in. "The humans have complete tactical profiles of your fleet capabilities, command structure, and operational doctrine. They know how you fight better than you do, because they've been watching and learning while you've been assuming they were irrelevant." The human strategy was becoming clearer with each passing hour. They had spent decades gathering intelligence on every major galactic power, developing countermeasures for technologies they didn't yet possess, and creating tactical doctrines specifically designed to defeat enemies with superior firepower. The Xerian invasion wasn't an unexpected crisis for humanity. It was a scenario they had war-gamed thousands of times. Admiral Kethvar's flagship suddenly shuddered as proximity alarms sounded. "What was that?" "Unknown energy discharge, sir," his communications officer reported. "No visible source." The tactical display showed empty space around the Xerian fleet, but ZYX's enhanced sensors detected subtle gravitational anomalies that suggested the presence of massive objects using some form of stealth technology. "Admiral," she said urgently, "I believe you're surrounded by human stealth platforms. They've been watching your approach to Earth while remaining undetected." As if summoned by her words, space around the Xerian fleet suddenly erupted with weapon discharges. Dozens of previously invisible human vessels decloaked simultaneously, their weapons targeted not at the Xerian ships, but at their formation integrity. Missiles streaked between capital ships, forcing them to scatter their defensive fire. Electronic warfare packages disrupted communications and sensor networks. In seconds, the carefully organized Xerian battle line dissolved into chaos. But the humans weren't trying to destroy the fleet. As quickly as they had appeared, they vanished again, leaving the Xerions intact but disorganized. It was a demonstration of capability rather than an attempt at annihilation. Psychological warfare. Vex 9 observed with something approaching admiration. They're proving they can strike at will while choosing not to. They're making their enemies afraid to advance, while showing that retreat won't guarantee safety either. Admiral Kethvar was clearly shaken by the encounter. His fleet was still operational, but the illusion of invincibility had been shattered. The humans had proven they could penetrate his defenses whenever they chose. The knowledge that invisible enemies were watching his every move would weigh on every decision from this point forward. ZYX's began to understand why the galaxy feared humanity, even if most species couldn't articulate their concerns. It wasn't just their military capabilities or their tactical flexibility. It was their fundamental approach to conflict that violated every assumption about civilized behavior. Most species fought wars to achieve specific political or territorial objectives. Humans fought wars to completely destroy their enemy's ability and, well, to continue fighting. They didn't seek victory, they sought the absolute elimination of future threats. As she watched the Xerian fleet struggle to reform its battle line, while knowing they were under constant observation by invisible enemies, ZYXR realized that this war was already over. The humans had won the moment they forced their enemies to fight on human terms rather than galactic ones. The question now was not whether humanity would survive the Xerian invasion. The question was what the galaxy would look like after humanity demonstrated that even the mightiest empire could be brought to its knees by opponents who refused to accept the established rules of warfare. The Xerian Empire had been a galactic power for over 3,000 years. In that time, they had conquered 47 star systems, enslaved dozens of species, and built a military machine that had never known defeat. 6 weeks after their invasion of human space began, Admiral Kethvar sat in his command center staring at reports that told a story no Xerian had ever imagined possible. They were losing. ZYXR watched from the observation deck of the Harmony as Xerian supply lines collapsed throughout the local galactic arm. The humans hadn't just disrupted individual convoys or attacked isolated outposts. They had systematically analyzed the entire Xerian logistics network and targeted it with surgical precision. Fuel production down 60%, reported Dr. Vex 9, his insectoid features clicking rapidly as he processed incoming intelligence. Food shipments to 17 colonies completely interdicted. 3 major shipyards operating at minimal capacity due to lack of raw materials. Commander Threshka studied the tactical displays with growing amazement. How are they maintaining this level of operational tempo? They should be running out of supplies themselves. ZYXR had been wondering the same thing until she received intelligence reports from human space that revealed the true scope of their preparation. They're not just using military assets, she realized. They've converted their entire civilian economy into a war machine. The holographic display shifted to show human industrial centers throughout their territory. Every planet was contributing to the war effort in ways that defied conventional military logistics. Agricultural worlds were producing not just food for their own forces, but surplus supplies that were being cached at hidden locations throughout neutral space. Mining colonies were extracting raw materials at unprecedented rates, feeding mobile refineries that could produce ammunition and spare parts anywhere in the galaxy. "Look at this," she said, highlighting a series of data streams from human commercial vessels. "They're using merchant ships as forward supply depots. Every civilian craft has been equipped with military-grade sensors and communication equipment. They're creating a logistics network that's completely integrated with their military operations." But the most disturbing revelation came from analysis of human manufacturing capacity. In the 6 weeks since the war began, they had somehow increased their industrial output by over 800%. Factories that had never produced military equipment were churning out weapons and armor. Research facilities had been converted to develop new technologies specifically designed to counter Xerian capabilities. "This is beyond unprecedented," Vex9 muttered. "No species can reorganize their entire civilization this quickly without complete social collapse." Zwaixthara had been studying human social psychology, and what she found explained their seemingly impossible adaptability. "They're not reorganizing," she corrected. "They're activating contingency plans that have existed for decades. Every human civilian has been trained for this scenario since childhood." She brought up educational records from human schools. Children as young as 6 years old received instruction in basic resource management, emergency manufacturing techniques, and military logistics. What other species considered purely academic subjects, humans taught as survival skills. "They've been preparing their entire population for total war since before they achieved spaceflight," she continued. "Every human citizen is essentially a reservist who can contribute to military operations when needed." The implications were staggering. While other species maintained sharp distinctions between civilian and military populations, humans had created a society where every individual was both. Their entire civilization could transition from peaceful commerce to total warfare without missing a step. Admiral Kethvar appeared on the communication channel, and Zwaixthara was shocked by his appearance. The proud Xerian commander looked haggard, his scales dulled with stress. "Council observers, I require your assistance in opening diplomatic channels with the human leadership." Commander Threshkaw's scales shifted to display surprise. "Admiral, are you requesting mediation?" "I'm requesting clarification of human war aims," Kethvar replied carefully. "Our intelligence suggests they have capabilities we didn't anticipate. Before this conflict escalates further, the Dominion wishes to understand what the humans hope to achieve." Zwaixthara felt a chill run through her nervous system. After 6 weeks of warfare, the Xerian Empire was ready to negotiate. That meant human strategies were working beyond their most optimistic projections. "I'll relay your request," she said, "but I should warn you that human diplomatic doctrine may not align with galactic norms." The response from human leadership came within hours, delivered personally by Admiral Chun via hyperwave transmission. Her appearance had changed since their first meeting. Gone was the professional demeanor of a fleet commander. In its place was something harder, more focused. She looked like someone who had been fighting a war for years rather than weeks. "Admiral Kethvar," Chun said without preamble, "you contacted us 6 weeks ago with an ultimatum demanding our surrender or extinction. Has your position changed?" The Xerian commander straightened, attempting to project his traditional authority. "The Dominion is prepared to discuss terms for ending this conflict. Perhaps we can reach an accommodation that serves both our interests." "An accommodation?" Chin's voice carried a weight that made the air itself seem denser. "Admiral, I'm not sure you understand the situation. You declared war on humanity with the explicit goal of enslaving or exterminating our entire species. There is no accommodation that preserves the existence of your empire." Kethvar's scales rippled with shock. You cannot seriously be suggesting the complete destruction of the Zirian Dominion. We are a galactic power with a history spanning millennia. We're a galactic power, Chen corrected. Your supply lines have been severed, your military production crippled, and your occupied territories are in open revolt. 3 of your client species have declared independence in the past week alone. Your empire is already collapsing. We're simply ensuring it can never threaten anyone again. ZYXTRA stared at the intelligence reports flowing across her screens. Chen wasn't exaggerating. Human forces had done more than disrupt Zirian logistics. They had systematically contacted every enslaved species in Zirian space, providing them with weapons, tactical support, and coordination for simultaneous uprisings. Impossible, she whispered. How do they establish communication with dozens of species across hundreds of light years without detection? Dr. Vex9 was analyzing the same data with growing amazement. They didn't establish communications recently. They've been in contact with Zirian slaves for decades. This entire rebellion was coordinated years in advance. The true scope of human strategic planning was becoming clear. They hadn't just prepared for war with the Zirions. They had prepared for the complete liberation of every species under Zirian control. The invasion of human space hadn't been an unprovoked attack on a peaceful civilization. It had been the trigger for a galactic revolution that humans had been orchestrating for generations. You planned this, Admiral Kethvar accused, his voice carrying a mixture of fear and admiration. You deliberately provoked us into attacking so you could justify destroying our empire. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. Admiral, your empire has enslaved billions of sentient beings and exterminated entire species for the crime of resisting conquest. We didn't need to provoke you. We simply needed to wait for you to reveal your true nature. She gestured to something off-screen, and the transmission expanded to show the bridge of her flagship. ZYXTRA was surprised to see representatives of over a dozen different species working alongside human officers. These weren't prisoners or refugees. They were fully integrated members of the command staff. Every species you've conquered has contributed intelligence about your capabilities and vulnerabilities, Chen continued. Every slave you've forced to work in your shipyards has passed information to human intelligence networks. Every planet you've occupied has become a source of strategic data. The revelation hit Kethvar like a physical blow. You've been infiltrating our territory for decades. We've been liberating your territory for decades, Chen corrected. The difference is more than semantic. We didn't insert human agents into your empire. We empowered your victims to resist their oppressors. ZYXTRA was beginning to understand the true nature of human strategic thinking. They didn't just plan military campaigns. They planned social revolutions. Rather than fighting the Zirian Empire directly, they had systematically undermined its foundations by giving hope and weapons to its victims. But this will destabilize the entire galactic arm, Commander Threshka protested. Dozens of species suddenly. Achieving independence will create chaos that could last for centuries. Admiral Chun turned her attention to the Council observers. Commander, with respect, the current galactic order is built on the assumption that some species have the right to enslave others. If preventing that suffering requires restructuring galactic civilization, then that's a cost humanity is willing to bear. The transmission continued for another hour, but the essential message was clear. Humanity wasn't fighting a territorial war or seeking political advantage. They were fighting to fundamentally change the nature of galactic civilization. The Zirian Empire was just the first target in a much larger campaign. After the communication ended, the observation station fell into stunned silence. The implications of what they had learned were too vast to process immediately. Humanity wasn't just militarily defeating the Zirions. They were systematically dismantling the entire galactic power structure that had existed for millennia. We need to contact the Council immediately, Threshka said finally. This affects every major power in the galaxy. But before they could begin composing their report, proximity alarms sounded throughout the station. The tactical display lit up with new contacts as massive energy signatures appeared throughout local space. The Xerian fleet was attempting one final assault on Earth, throwing everything they had left into a desperate attack on the human homeworld. What they found waiting for them redefined every assumption about defensive warfare. Earth's orbital space had been transformed into a killing field of unprecedented sophistication. The asteroid fortresses that Admiral Chun had shown them weeks earlier were just the beginning. The humans had weaponized everything in their solar system, from planetary defense satellites to converted civilian infrastructure. But the most shocking revelation was the composition of the defending fleet. Less than half the ships were human in origin. The remainder were vessels from dozens of different species, all fighting under human tactical coordination. Ships that had been reported destroyed or missing over the past year were suddenly appearing as part of Earth's defense network. They've been recruiting secretly, Vex 9 realized. Every species that has suffered under galactic oppression has been sending representatives to join humanity's cause. The battle that followed lasted less than 4 hours, but its implications would reshape galactic history for millennia to come. The Xerian fleet, already weakened by weeks of guerrilla warfare, found itself facing not just human resistance, but a coalition of every species they had ever wronged. The engagement was less a battle than a demonstration. The human-led coalition didn't just defeat the Xerian fleet. They captured most of it intact, using sophisticated electronic warfare systems to disable rather than destroy enemy vessels. Xerian crews were taken prisoner, their ships impounded, and their technology studied for future reference. Admiral Kethvar's flagship was among the capture vessels. In his final transmission before surrendering, he delivered a message that would haunt Zuaixtara's dreams for years to come. "Council observers," he said, his voice hollow with defeat. "Record this for galactic history. The Xerian Empire fell not to superior firepower or advanced technology. We were defeated by a species that understands something we forgot long ago. War is not about destroying your enemies. War is about building alliances stronger than your enemies can break." As the human fleet secured the last of the Xerian vessels, Admiral Chun transmitted one final message to the Galactic Council Observation Station. "Observer Zuaixtara, please inform the Council that humanity formally requests a review of galactic governance structures. We believe it's time for a more equitable system of interstellar relations. We look forward to productive discussions about the future of galactic civilization." The transmission ended, leaving the observation team staring at tactical displays that showed human forces beginning to spread throughout former Xerian territory. They weren't occupying conquered worlds. They were establishing humanitarian aid stations and defense networks to protect newly liberated populations. Zuaixtara began composing her final report to the Galactic Council, knowing that her words would likely determine the course of interstellar relations for generations to come. The humans had proven that the established galactic order could be challenged and defeated. More importantly, they had demonstrated an alternative model of civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. The question now was not whether humanity would reshape galactic civilization. The question was whether the existing powers would adapt to the new reality or resist until they shared the Xerian Empire's fate. As she watched human medical ships arriving at former Xerian slave worlds, Zuaixtara realized that she was witnessing more than the end of a war. She was witnessing the birth of a new galactic age, where the strong would be judged not by their ability to conquer, but by their willingness to protect those who could not protect themselves. 3 months after the fall of the Xerian Empire, Zuaixtara stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council, preparing to deliver the most important testimony in the organization's 12,000-year history. Around her, representatives from over 200 species filled the crystalline amphitheater, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity that would have been beautiful under normal circumstances. These are not normal circumstances. The hall buzzed with tension as species that had coexisted peacefully for centuries now viewed each other with suspicion and fear. The human victory over the Zerions had shattered every assumption about military power and galactic stability. Wars that hadn't been fought in millennia suddenly seemed possible again. Alliances that had stood for eons were being questioned and renegotiated. Observer HFY announced the supreme arbitrator, her ancient voice echoing through the chamber's acoustic systems. You have requested this emergency session to present evidence regarding the human conflict with the Zerion Dominion. The Council recognizes your authority to speak. HFY activated her presentation matrix, and holographic displays materialized throughout the amphitheater. The first image showed the initial Zerion fleet approaching human space 6 months earlier, a massive armada that had represented one of the most powerful military forces in galactic history. Honored representatives, she began, what I am about to share with you will challenge every assumption we have held about warfare, diplomacy, and the nature of galactic civilization itself. A ripple of movement went through the assembled delegates. The Altarian representative, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns of anxiety, spoke first. Observer, we have already received reports about human military capabilities. Surely this matter can be handled through standard diplomatic channels. With respect, Representative Shalaketh, there are no standard diplomatic channels for what humanity has accomplished, HFY replied. They haven't simply won a military victory. They have fundamentally altered the balance of galactic power. She gestured to the displays, and the images shifted to show the current state of former Zerion territory. Where once there had been a unified empire spanning dozens of star systems, now there were independent worlds protected by human defense networks and administered by coalitions of liberated species. In the span of 12 standard weeks, she continued, humanity has dismantled a 3,000-year-old empire and established a completely new model of interstellar governance. They have demonstrated capabilities that render our current military doctrines obsolete. The hegemony representative, General Morthak, rose to speak. His massive form dominated the section reserved for warrior species. Observer, are you suggesting that humans pose a threat to galactic security? If so, perhaps we should consider preemptive action before they can expand their influence further. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. Representatives from dozens of species turned to stare at Morthak with expressions ranging from shock to calculation. The suggestion of military action against humanity had been whispered in private chambers, but never spoken openly in the council. HFY felt a chill run through her nervous system. General, I would strongly advise against that course of action. Allow me to explain why. She activated a new set of displays showing the current deployment of human forces throughout the galaxy. The pattern was unlike anything in recorded military history. Rather than concentrating their fleets in defensible positions, humans had scattered their assets across hundreds of star systems, often in regions far from their own territory. As of this morning, human military assets are present in the territory of over 50 different species, she announced. Not as invasion forces or occupation troops, but as invited guests providing humanitarian aid and defense coordination. A wave of murmurs swept through the assembly. The implications were staggering. Humanity had somehow gained military access to a significant portion of galactic civilization without conquest or coercion. Impossible, declared the Vorthan ambassador. No species could achieve such widespread deployment without triggering defensive responses from local governments. Unless those governments requested their presence, HFY replied quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. She activated another display, this one showing intelligence reports from throughout the galaxy. The data painted a picture that challenged every assumption about humanity's long-term intentions. 17 species have formally requested human military assistance in the past month, she continued. Not against external threats, but against internal problems. Pirates, rebel groups, corporate warfare, territorial disputes that their own governments couldn't resolve. She highlighted specific examples. The Kellen system, where human peacekeepers had ended a civil war that had raged for decades. The Nexus trade routes, where human patrols had eliminated piracy problems that local authorities had considered unsolvable. The frontier colonies, where human medical teams were providing aid to populations suffering from resource shortages. They're not conquering territory, she explained. They're making themselves indispensable. Dr. Vex 9, attending as a council consultant, accessed his analytical systems. Observer, are you suggesting that humanity is pursuing a strategy of soft conquest rather than military occupation? I'm suggesting that humanity has redefined the concept of power projection, Zhuaixtara replied. Traditional galactic powers maintain influence through economic leverage and military intimidation. Humans are building influence by solving problems that others cannot or will not address. She displayed communication transcripts from human diplomatic channels. The messages revealed a coordinated effort to identify and address humanitarian crises throughout the galaxy. Refugee populations were being relocated to safe territories with human protection. Environmental disasters were being remediated with human technology. Oppressed minorities were receiving weapons and training to defend themselves against local tyrants. They're systematically identifying every weakness in the current galactic order and positioning themselves as the solution, she continued. It's not military conquest. It's civilizational replacement. The Altarian representative's crystalline form had shifted to deep purple, indicating extreme agitation. Observer, what you're describing sounds like a calculated campaign to undermine galactic stability. Surely the Council should take action to prevent further disruption. Zhuaixtara had been dreading this moment, but she knew it was inevitable. Representative, the Council should be aware that human intelligence networks have been monitoring our deliberations for several hours. Shocked gasps echoed through the chamber as representatives realized the implications. If humans had penetrated the Grand Assembly security systems, then no communication in the galaxy could be considered private. How was that possible? Demanded General Morthak. This facility is protected by the most sophisticated security systems in known space. Before Zhuaixtara could respond, the holographic displays throughout the chamber flickered and changed. Admiral Chen's image appeared, transmitted from somewhere in human space. Her expression was calm, but carried an underlying authority that made the assembled delegates fall silent. Honored representatives, Chen said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. I apologize for the intrusion, but recent discussions have made it necessary to address some misconceptions about human intentions. The Supreme Arbitrator's ancient features registered shock. Admiral, this is an unprecedented violation of Council sovereignty. By what authority do you interrupt our deliberations? By the authority of 200 billion sentient beings who have requested our protection, Chun replied without hesitation. Representatives, humanity understands your concerns about galactic stability. We share those concerns. That's why we're here. She gestured, and the displays shifted to show humanitarian operations throughout the galaxy. Human teams were providing medical aid to plague victims, rebuilding infrastructure destroyed by natural disasters, and training local forces to defend against criminal organizations. For 12,000 years, the Galactic Council has maintained peace through careful balance of power, Chen continued. That system worked as long as all major powers shared common interests. But it failed to protect the weak from the strong, the small from the large, the peaceful from the aggressive. General Morthak rose to his full, imposing height. Admiral, you speak of protection, but what we see is systematic expansion of human influence. How do we know you won't become the next galactic empire? Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her posture suggested she had been expecting this question. General, may I share something about human history that might clarify our position? The displays shifted again, showing historical record from Earth. Images of human civilizations rising and falling, wars fought with devastating consequences, entire continents laid waste by conflicts that achieved nothing but suffering. Humanity spent most of our history making the same mistakes you're worried about, Chen said. We built empires that collapsed under their own weight. We fought wars that devastated entire populations. We learned through bitter experience that power without justice is ultimately self-destructive. She paused, allowing the implications to settle. We're not trying to build an empire, representatives. We're trying to prevent the need for empires by addressing the problems that make them seem necessary. The Vorthan ambassador leaned forward in his hovering chair. Admiral, your words are reassuring, but how can we verify your intentions? What guarantees do you offer that humanity won't abuse its growing influence? No guarantees, Chen replied simply. Only transparency. Every human military operation is conducted with full documentation available to any interested party. Every diplomatic agreement includes provisions for international monitoring. Every humanitarian mission includes representatives from the species being aided. She gestured to something off-screen, and the transmission expanded to show the bridge of her flagship. Zhuangxia was amazed to see that the command crew included representatives from over 20 different species, all working as equal partners rather than subordinates. Humanity learned something important from our own history, Chun continued. No single species is wise enough to govern the galaxy alone. But, working together, we can create systems that protect everyone's interests. The Supreme Arbitrator had been silent during this exchange, but now she spoke with the weight of centuries behind her words. Admiral, what you propose sounds idealistic. History suggests that power corrupts even the most well-intentioned species. Then limit our power, Chun said immediately. Humanity formally proposes the establishment of a Galactic Protection Authority with representatives from every species that chooses to participate. Human forces would operate only under international mandate, with full oversight and accountability. The proposal hit the chamber like a shockwave. No major galactic power had ever voluntarily submitted to international oversight of their military forces. The concept challenged every assumption about sovereignty and national interest. Zhuangxia realized that this was the moment she had been building toward in her testimony. Representatives, I believe Admiral Chun is offering humanity as a test case for a new model of galactic governance. They're asking you to judge them not by their capabilities, but by how they use those capabilities. Dr. Vex 9 was analyzing the proposal with his usual systematic precision. Admiral, such an authority would require unprecedented levels of cooperation between species with vastly different cultures and interests. How do you propose to achieve consensus on complex humanitarian interventions? The same way we achieved consensus on the Zirian liberation, Chen replied, by focusing on principles rather than politics. Protection of sentient life, prevention of genocide, assistance to those who cannot help themselves. These aren't human values. They're universal values. She brought up evidence to support her claim. Records of communications with dozens of species during the Zirian conflict showed remarkable agreement on fundamental ethical principles. While cultures varied enormously in their specific practices, they shared common recognition of concepts like justice, mercy, and protection of the innocent. The challenge isn't finding shared values, Chen continued. The challenge is creating institutions powerful enough to enforce those values against those who would violate them. General Morthak had been silent during this exchange, but now he spoke with grudging respect. Admiral, you've demonstrated that humanity possesses the military capability to enforce such principles. But capability without wisdom leads to tyranny. How do we know humans won't abuse this power? Admiral Chun smiled, and for the first time since the war began, the expression seemed genuinely warm rather than predatory. General, because you'll be there to stop us if we try. The proposal that emerged from the next 6 hours of discussion would reshape galactic civilization for millennia to come. The Galactic Protection Authority would be established with humanity providing the military backbone, but with governance shared equally among all participating species. No military action could be taken without majority consent from the Governing Council. All operations would be subject to real-time monitoring and immediate recall if abuses were detected. Most importantly, the authority would focus on prevention rather than punishment. Instead of waiting for crises to develop, they would work to address underlying causes of conflict before they escalated to violence. As HFY watched the final vote, she reflected on everything she had learned about humanity over the past months. They had indeed marched to war with the Zerions, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of seeking to defeat their enemies, they had sought to transform the conditions that created enemies in the first place. The vote was unanimous. In her final report to the Council Archives, HFY wrote, "I witnessed humanity march to war and understood why the galaxy fears them. But I also understood why the galaxy needs them. They fight not to conquer, but to liberate, not to destroy, but to build, not to rule, but to serve. They have shown us that the choice is not between peace and war, but between justice and oppression. The galaxy fears humanity because they represent change. But that change may be the only thing that can save us from ourselves." As the council session ended and representatives began the long journey back to their homeworlds, HFY remained in the chamber, contemplating the implications of what had just occurred. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had transformed a military victory into a mandate for peace. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in centuries, it held hope rather than fear. The galaxy had found guardians who understood that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to protect.